Okay, we're doing more from Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by me, P. Rogers. Alphabetical order on the letter J. We're doing Juvenal. He was a Roman writer from 50 to 127 AD. Wrote a lot of satires. He had been trained in the school of rhetoric run by Quintilian, the great rhetoric instructor, whose greatest hero, of course, was Cicero. Rhetoric means to speak effectively, to know how to use templates that are like impact boosters. Okay, and Cicero was the greatest public speaker of all time in the Latin language. Juvenal had gotten himself in trouble for insulting a famous actor who had high connections, and he was exiled for a while, which again is a very common thing you hear about writers. When you hear that a writer's been exiled, that often should make you think they're more likely to be good. Voltaire was exiled. Voltaire's a jerk, but he was brilliant, okay? Here's the first quote by Juvenal. Luxury destroys more efficiently than wars. And you can see, when you read these ancient Greeks and Romans, you'll see the precursors to great things that happened, many centuries later. So Brave New World by Aldous Huxley takes that same point of view, that hedonism weakens people. Okay, and there it is. And you hear the same thing in like the cycle of history, Giambattista Vico, that at first the men are proud and strong and religious and righteous, and they gradually become decadent and lazy and weak and effeminate, and then their civilization collapses, okay? Juvenal. The people long for only two things, bread and circuses. Give them bread and circuses, and they will never revolt. Okay, the face, not the woman, is the attraction. There is no reliance to be placed on appearance. And I would say that is true. What I've noticed with women is that, like for me, I can talk to a guy 2 minutes, and I can pretty much figure out what's his education, what's his intent. Does he like me? Does he not like me? Is he indifferent to me? Is this just transactional? I can really assess a lot of them. Is he insecure? Is he angry? I can understand men very well. I kind of been around men all my life playing sports and stuff and dealing with them at work. Versus a woman, women have so many more little games. They talk with their face, their head, their gestures, their eyebrows, and they're playing games a lot of times. You got to look at their face. You can't tell it all on a phone. But it's much harder to figure out a woman. It took me like over a year to figure out my wife. At least a year. Plus, when a woman is pretty, we give her like this halo effect and think that she's actually more than she is. When you get to know a lot of these pretty women, they're really stupid, and a lot of them are not that nice, but you can't tell at first. And there's other women that are not pretty at all, but they're really nice and they're funny and they're clever and all that, but it's just how it is. Okay, so he says, give up all hope of peace so long as your mother-in-law is alive. Yeah, when I was married, I noticed that when my mother-in-law was always there and my wife. And so on any topic, I was always outvoted 2-1 because they always vote the same. Should we do this with the kitchen? 2-1, always against me. So you're not going to win that. Logic and truth might be useful when you're talking to the guys, but when you're dealing with a wife and a mother-in-law, they're always going to overwhelm you with emotion, okay? There is no effrontery like that of a woman caught in the act. Her very guilt inspires her with wrath and insolence. Yeah, the bigger a jerk my wife had been about anything, the nastier she would be. And it was like, women are geniuses at shifting the blame. And my wife was like the queen of all of them. It's like, if you put us side by side, my IQ is like numerous standard deviations higher, okay? And, on any matter, I would win 100% of arguments if they were decided by logic and truth. But most of them are decided by emotion and hysteria and getting co-voters, with a mother-in-law or something. So I lost most arguments in the family, but it was kind of a shock to me. I grew up in a very, very, honest, good family. So I was like, I learned all about lying and bullshitting and blame shifting from being married. It was quite a social educational experience. Okay, the censor pardons the raven but blocks the dove. One gets a cross for his crime, the other a crown. All things in Rome may be bought for money. Everything in Rome has its price. And that's like Cicero when he said that nothing is secure from large sums of money. That's why you have to have Christianity. Only Christianity can say, no, we will do what is right. That's more important than money or anything else. You have to have something that says what is right and fair and good is more important than money. And as far as I'm aware, Christianity is the only thing that does that on a large scale. That's why parents are the best person in the world for a child rather than any big fancy doctor or fancy expert, because the parents love the kid, whereas the other ones don't. So they're going to do what's right to that kid. And even if they're illiterate, stupid idiots, they will push to do what is right for that kid no matter what. That's why they're better. Okay, love is more important than these other things. Okay, you need, ideally you want both, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, now here's a great one. When you talk about, the philosopher guardians of Plato, and Juvenal makes the point, who will watch the watchers? How do we know we can trust these so-called philosopher kings? How do we know we can trust the so-called experts in so many different areas, okay? Who will watch the watchers? Who will guard the guards? Okay, vice deceives us when it is dressed in the garb of virtue. Yeah, a lot of times scumbag evil people try to pretend they have the moral high ground. When somebody is really being bad, like a public school, do not allow them the moral high ground. Anytime they claim moral high ground, say, well, then why do you castrate children? Why do you sell amphetamines to children? Why do you encourage children to commit suicide through the MAID program, medical assistance in dying? Don't let them take the high ground with you. They don't deserve it. What they're doing is wrong. So you need to know how to handle them. Otherwise, you'll get pushed around by them, okay? And it's like the Shakespeare quote, one may smile and smile and smile and be a villain. Okay, Juvenal. Integrity is praised and it starves. Yeah, that's true. Like look at my YouTube channel. It's not monetized. I don't make any money from this. Versus all these lying channels selling olive oil and all this other nonsense. They got millions of viewers, sponsors. Some doctors are paid over $1 million a year to promote olive oil and get it written into recommendations from big name hospitals and other places. Okay, Juvenal quote, he was a rare bird, a sort of black swan. It was back in the day when they didn't think there was such a thing. Here's another quote. If you wish to do anything great, you must risk exile or prison. Yeah, lots of great writers have been exiled or imprisoned because they said stuff that was not popular with the big power of their day. When talent fails, anger writes the verse. Okay, and that's a little bit like Victor Hugo's quote. The most eloquent thing is, anger. Because the person says what they really think. Anger can be eloquent. Okay, the next one is Franz Kafka. Franz Kafka lived from 1883 to 1942. He was a writer in Austria-Hungary. And he worked for an insurance company. He had gone to law school, but he just sort of worked in an insurance company to make money. His heart wasn't into it. He's a little frustrated. He's working such long hours. He really wanted to be a writer. And he was a brilliant guy. He's a little bit crazy and socially awkward and austere. But he was also very intelligent and very funny. Being socially awkward, he had trouble with women. He often went to brothels. He died of tuberculosis when he was only about 40 years of age. And so, why do I even include him in this book? Because usually young writers don't have much to say. A lot of wisdom comes in those years as you get over 40 and 50, and you've sort of seen life multiple times over, and you have a better perspective on things. Okay, why? He wrote 2 magnificent books. The Metamorphosis, where it starts out saying, I awoke and I had been turned into an insect, which is a very strong statement of alienation. And I remember being shocked by reading that, but it was extraordinarily interesting. I enjoyed that book. I also read his other book, The Trial, which is where you get this phrase, Kafkaesque writing style, sort of this unseen, faceless bureaucracy is persecuting him. He doesn't even know why. He can't. It's unknowable, Byzantine, and just progressively this emotional suffocation and tension. And that's basically communism, okay, what they do to people. And he sort of sensed that sort of thing happening in Eastern Europe and Russia, and he's writing about it, and also the frustration of his own life. How do you organize your life so you can do what you want and you don't get stuck with tedious, boring crap just to make money? It's not easy to do, and it all comes back to the same question of Kierkegaard, How do we choose life over stagnation? And it's not easy to do because it's very difficult to monetize creativity. Okay, he didn't make that much money, hardly anything as a writer. Okay, let's see here. We got a couple of his lines. A writer should follow his obsessions relentlessly. If it isn't written, then write it yourself. It is only because of their stupidity that they are able to be so sure of themselves. The purpose of a school was to blot out the student's individuality. Yeah, schools make you conformist. What am I doing here in this endless winter? Just because your doctor has a name for your condition doesn't mean he knows what it is. So anyways, that is Franz Kafka. Okay, next one is Jerome Kagan. He's an educator guy. And what I liked about him was he emphasized that kids need more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic. Schools are totally stupid. They're dehumanizing to these poor children. And some kids, they're just not quite as good as the other kids at reading or arithmetic, math when they're young. And they can become disillusioned. They can think that they're stupid and sort of give up on their own academic abilities. And he says it's nice that they have other outlets for their creativity, like learning how to draw. I've seen learning how to draw being wonderfully helpful for child development. Okay, you get a good art teacher. And for boys, you have to have a male art teacher. Women they don't understand boys. I've seen boys go to 5 different female art teachers, and they hate it. The women are trying to make them draw flowers and like all this wimpy female stuff, and they don't understand. There's this big lie in the modern United States that men are like women. We are not like women. We really don't. We love women, but our personalities, our whole style, it's not like them at all. A woman's sort of pampered and spoiled, gets unconditional love. With a man, it's told, do your job, make yourself worthwhile. Nobody gives a rat's ass about you. So as a man, you have to have this strong inner drive to excel and to achieve and to make yourself into something. A woman doesn't have to have that. I mean, it's nice if she does, fine. But if she's just even a little bit cute, some guy will pay her bills, okay? She's going to end up having kids, raising a family. If she wants to do something intellectual, fine. But she doesn't have that essential necessity. Lots of men don't reproduce. A huge percentage of men are age 30 and never had sex with a woman other than maybe a prostitute, okay? So for a guy, it's a lot harder to achieve a level of success at which you can attract a woman, support a family. It's not that easy. It's not guaranteed at all. Women are more than twice as likely as a man to reproduce. Okay, so anyways, for a child, learning, getting some sense of satisfaction from playing sports, from playing a musical instrument, from learning how to draw, or from other things, from camping, hiking, outdoor skills, all these things, from cooking, they're all good. And in real life, those are valuable things, okay? And it doesn't really matter when a kid learns to read. It's okay if he learns at 4. It's okay if he learns at 7 or 8 years old. The important thing is that he likes it. If the child likes to read and is allowed to choose the books themselves, they'll read a lot and they'll become well educated. But if they're not, then it can be very frustrating. I've seen kids give up on their academic abilities for a couple of years at a time. Then they spend years trying to catch up, and it's a frustrating, difficult thing for them. Okay, now the last and final person for today, we're going to talk about Immanuel Kant. He lived from 1724 to 1804. He was a German professor. And I'm going to let you know right from the start, Kant is a scumbag, okay? And you say, well, why do I include him? Because it's important to know about him, because he's promoted by this hand, you know which hand this is, left, and the university system as being like this great philosopher. He's a piece of crap. He's evil. The more you understand where Kant is coming from, the more you will not like him. And it's important to understand where he's coming from, because this type of lying is used on people all the time. Oscar Wilde made a statement, Immanuel doesn't pun, he can't. Okay. Immanuel Kant, thinking is talking to oneself. Okay. And again, he has this reputation as being a great philosopher, but the best reason I included him was that Ayn Rand wrote about him extensively. She hates him. She says he's one of the most evil people who ever lived, that he destroyed philosophy. He destroyed education. He's one of the great destroyers of Western civilization. She describes him as the first hippie, because what he tries to tell people is that you can't trust your own judgment. You can't trust your own sense. Okay? He was raised a Lutheran, but man, he pretends to be a Christian, but he's an evil snake. Okay? He's sort of a... Okay, let me just get down to... We'll get into the better stuff with him. So he did say a few things that sound nice. Always be good as if you were being watched, and that's how you should behave. Now let me show you what Ayn Rand says. So again, the things he's famous for was sort of a little bit like David Hume. This idea of you can't trust your senses; they're not reliable. Therefore, we can't really know anything. And so here's what Ayn Rand says about him. Kant promoted mysticism dressed up as rationality. Kant is a two-faced Janus who wore an Apollo mask to the university, but was really a Dionysian. So, of course, Apollo is the Greek god of reason, versus Dionysus is the Greek god of alcohol, partying, and craziness and chaos. Kant used the prestige of reason to undermine reason. Kant is the greatest villain ever in the history of philosophy. Kant's philosophy is Platonism without paganism. The ruling philosopher today in Harvard and everywhere else is Immanuel Kant. He is the real villain of our age. Kant preached that man's mind is not valid, that the things you perceive are not real. Kant said that we can never perceive things as they actually are, the thing as it is. Kant says you must do your duty, which means do things for which you have no interest. Students who listen to this stuff end up smoking dope. It makes you sad and hopeless. It's sort of like Kafka-esque, okay? It reminds one of Hegel. Just endless BS, meaninglessness, atheism. It's really destructive and bad, okay? All right, so a little more on Ayn Rand talking about Immanuel Kant. We are reaching the climax of Kantism in students. The Renaissance was the result of Aristotle's influence. Kant was a philosopher who undercut the value of reason. Kant was the destroyer of the Enlightenment. So they'll say Martin Luther was the destroyer of the Renaissance. Okay, Kant was the destroyer of what was good in the Enlightenment. I would say also what happened in France, 1789 to 1793, was 50,000 heads in the guillotine. That had a lot to do with the destruction of the Enlightenment and the backlash through Romanticism, for example. Okay, so Ayn Rand continues. Kant undercut the value of reason. Kant promoted the hatred of the good for being the good. Yeah, that's another thing I hate about these guys. That's what they do. She said, Kant is the most evil man in mankind's history. Man, does she hate him, but it's for good reason, because I know what he's doing. He's a destroyer of young people's brains. He's telling them your brain is good for nothing. And like she said, if there is no God and your reason is worthless, why do anything? Just make a little money, get drunk, try to get laid. And a lot of people end up that way. They don't see any point to their life, or they don't see any hope. They don't have any hope or anything they can do. That's what life's like under communism. Tons and tons of men become alcoholics. Okay, so Ayn Rand continues. Kant's purpose was to corrupt and paralyze a man's mind. Kant claimed, in effect, that things we perceive are not real because we perceive them, that we can't trust our senses. There is an unbroken line from Kant to Lenin. Yep, I'm telling you, that path of atheism. And remember, I read that book recently, and I'll do another book report on it soon. I'm sort of currently rereading it. It's The Light in the Cave by Arthur Herman, about the difference between Plato and Aristotle. Plato was a big fan of Sparta because they had defeated Athens in the Peloponnesian War, versus Aristotle was a huge fan of Athens because he admired the great intelligence and the achievements that had come out of that place. So Aristotle was very much in favor of reason, practical. Let's look down, like in the School of Athens painting. Let's look down on what's around us and what we can learn from it, what we can understand from it, the biologist. Okay, versus Plato's like this idea of the perfect forms, all this mystic stuff, that there was really no clear justification for a lot of things that he said. Okay, don't get me wrong, Plato did a lot of good things too, but there's an evil streak in Plato and a collectivist streak in him that I don't like, and I can tell you the great smart people, they don't like it either. Like Schopenhauer said, most of the Greeks in general knew how a man could have a happy life except for Plato. Okay, Thomas Jefferson also said Plato is full of nonsense. All right. Immanuel Kant said, David Hume awakened me from my dogmatic slumbers. Hume's another jerk. He's an atheist, and he uses all these sort of sophistry, little tricky arguments to try to say life is meaningless, there is no God, and why do anything? If you talk to young people and you tell them that life is meaningless, there is no God, that there's no point in doing anything, then what does that do to their motivation? It's very damaging to them. Why not show them, look at all these great heroic men, all the great things they did. Look at these composers, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, etc., Brahms. Look at these great artists, Michelangelo, Raphael, Edmund Leighton, Arnold Friedberg, all these great ones, okay? And maybe you could do something great. Study them and see if you get any ideas. That's what you tell young people. Look at the life of Christ. Look at the life of the disciples. Look at the life of the saints. You look to your ancestors for inspiration. That's what you should do. That's what great people always do. Okay, let's see. If everything is relative and nothing has any meaning, okay, we already went through that. Gottfried Leibniz had a funny quote. He said, philosophy consists mostly of kicking up a lot of dust and then complaining that you can't see anything. Okay, and that's basically what Kant and Hume were doing. So I just went through Kant so you could know what a BS artist he was, and you could avoid him. And also in life, nothing is going to be proved out to infinity. So you just have to have reasonable certainty and work with that. That's what life's like. That's how it is. And you can be very certain of a lot of things, okay? So anyways, I hope you found that helpful.